Okay, Coach and Maddie back at it. We're getting pretty good at this.
This is fun. I like it.
I know, me too. Well, okay, so last time we talked, we got to talk a lot about what you did in the midst of your coaching, which I do want to get to again. Mm-hmm. But to start off, I kind of wanted to go back to the beginning, really, of your life, where you grew up, where your roots are. So Crestline, Ohio, right? That's where you were born. Mm-hmm. So tell me about that. Growing up, fellow Midwest girl also. But what was it like growing up there? And really what stuck with you?
It's a great question. So my parents are both from a small railroad town in north central Ohio called Crestline, Ohio. It's like a one or two stoplight kind of town. And from that little town, that town produced some amazing sports figures. Obviously, my dad was a college basketball coach and then a Division I athletic director. My uncle, his brother, my Uncle Mike, was the head football coach at Pittsburgh, Kansas, Cincinnati. And then their first cousins are the Harbaughs, Jack Harbaugh.
This is what I want to talk about.
So Jack and his wife Jackie, they're my godparents growing up. And then they had 3 children, which was John Harbaugh, the coach of the Ravens, Jim Harbaugh, who's at Michigan, and then Joni, who married eventually Tom Crean, who coached basketball at Marquette in Indiana and Georgia.
Right.
And so, and there was a number of other people that came out of this little bitty town, but the Gottfrieds and the Harbaughs kind of, were more prominent, I guess, with my dad and my Uncle Mike's success. And then Jim and John and Joni's father, Jack, was also a very successful college football coach as well. But it was a great community. I never actually lived there. I was born there.
Okay.
And my dad was a high school basketball coach all throughout, that kind of north central part of Ohio. And then he became the head basketball coach at Southern Illinois University and then got out of coaching and became an athletic director. And my family ended up in Mobile, Alabama. And so we're transplanted Southerners that had roots in Ohio. But, I ended up finishing high school in Alabama, then obviously going to college at Alabama and coaching in Alabama, all those type things as well.
Okay. So would you say just the environment that you grew up in was really just setting you on a path to be in sports? I mean, you were around sports and the people around you were in sports, but was that just who you were through and through?
Well, I was involved and around sports from the time I could probably remember as a little itty-bitty guy, I was in the locker rooms hanging out. I sat on the end of the bench of my dad's high school team and college teams when I was probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. There's pictures of me sitting down there on the bench. And so I was always around it. I'd go to practice, my dad's practice. I can remember as an elementary student, the elementary school I went to was only about a mile away from my dad's. He coached at a school called Ashland College, which now is Ashland University in Ohio. But, I would ride my bike to school, and then from school I would ride my bike to the college and then watch his teams practice, and then we'd put my bike in the back of the car, and that's how we'd go home at night. So I was just always around it. Yeah. I was around my uncle Mike Gottfried's teams as a football coach in the locker rooms. And so I always had a perspective from kind of even though they're my parents and my uncle, I always had a perspective kind of from the coach's angle, not just from playing, but also that coach's side as well.
Yeah. And just one more note on this of growing up around the Harbaughs and your uncle and your dad. So some pretty prominent coaches. We've got 2 NFL coaches, John Harbaugh with the Ravens, now Jim Harbaugh with the national champions of college football, University of Michigan head coach, and you with your coaching career. I mean, just to me, that's no small thing that these 3 people coming out of the same upbringing would go on to have that level of success. So from your perspective, is it, how you were raised? Is it just simply by proximity, what you were raised around, that you feel like set you guys on that path?
Well, I think with us, we're all from these kind of blue-collar, hard-working, my parents and Jim and John and Joni's father, Jack, they lived in it was an old railroad town. It was a hard town. It was a good town. They loved it. But I always grew up kind of in that tough, hard-nosed, you got to go for it and earn everything you get. Both my parents were educators. My mom taught school. My dad, obviously taught school as well, high school, and then he got into college. And we were just always around that. So nothing came easy. We didn't grow up in a lot of wealth. Yeah. We didn't have a lot, but we didn't want for anything. My parents were wonderful. Yeah. But I think there was always this push for all of us, even with Jack and Jackie, with their children, is sports is a big part of it. Yeah. But you play hard. And you're not soft. Yeah. We're not. None of us are soft, and I don't think we don't like that word because we just grew up kind of in some tough-minded people that came from some tough backgrounds, and I think that probably helped all of us.
Yeah. Oh, I bet so. So you go on to play college basketball at Alabama, and then from there, I'm kind of wondering, you're an incredible athlete, but then when for you did the thought of coaching really start to take its grip on you?
Well, I had a wonderful experience as a player, and I was fortunate to get drafted by Detroit, the Pistons, back in 1987. And, I ended up getting cut that year. They invited me back the next year as a free agent. I played in the LA Pro Summer League, which is now the Vegas NBA Summer League. I played with Detroit again, so I was kind of in and out of there for a while. But coaching for me was always something I felt I was called to do. I grew up around it. I watched my dad coach, and here's what probably impacted me more than anything. I watched my father, even at a small Division III college, and after the games, believe this or not, the team, the players, they would come to our house, and my mom would make sloppy joes and French fries, and these guys would dive into the fridge, and they were they felt like they were at home in our house. Yeah. And so I grew up around that. And then I can also remember there was one moment when my Uncle Mike, he was the football coach at Murray State, which I ended up coaching there later myself in basketball. But I just remember going into his locker room, and I was probably in the 8th grade, and he had 100 guys, 100 men holding hands in this big circle, and they were singing "Love Lifted Me." And I could just remember, like, wow, what an opportunity as an adult to have impact on young people. So I watched it from an early age with my dad and his brother, my uncle, and it probably had more of an impact on me than anybody else.
Wow. No, that's powerful. So do you feel like there was any certain point once you started coaching, your first coaching job was UCLA out of college, was there any one moment or one game or even just a program you got to be a part of that you thought, okay, I could be good at this? Like, I really want to stick with it.
I don't know that there was a moment, but I learned a lot. So when I went to UCLA, I started as a graduate assistant coach. I was newly married at the time. I think my stipend check, because you're going to school as a graduate assistant, it's like being an intern. Yeah. I'm taking classes, and my check is like $628 a month, and my rent is $900 back then, whenever it was. And my wife at the time had to get a job, and that's kind of how we made it, made a go at it. But I always knew I wanted to be a head coach. If I'm going to do this, I'm gonna be a head coach. And I always believed in my gut as a head coach I would win a national championship. That's all I ever wanted to do. I was fortunate enough in our 7th year. I was at UCLA 7 years. My last year there, we were able to win it. And Jim Harrick was the head coach. He was great to me. He was wonderful. And he taught me a lot, but I had an opportunity to start coaching at UCLA. One of the most storied, famous college basketball programs of all time. Now, John Wooden wasn't there, but we got to spend a ton of time around him. So that just kind of catapulted me. That was it was like bouncing off of shooting me right off out of the starting blocks in my coaching career. And it just turned out to be really well. But I just always wanted to be a head coach, and I wanted to win it all. And that was probably
not a bad game plan.
Every player I ever recruited, anytime, anywhere, it was like, we're winning the national. We're at Murray State. I said, we're winning the national championship somehow. So that was always the goal for me, and it was always part of what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Would you say, was there anyone like a mentor for you in your career of coaching that really just stuck with you and gave you honest feedback and encouraged you and cheered you on?
Well, I think when you go into anything, your first boss, especially if he's good to you, which Jim Harrick was at UCLA, he was really good to me and promoted me twice quickly and treated me really, really well.
Yeah.
And, I was 2,000 miles away from my parents. I spent every Christmas and Thanksgiving at his house with his family. And anytime a coach that was above me left to become a head coach, he just promoted me right up. And I was 26 years old. I'm out on the road recruiting for UCLA. I'm the only guy. I'm like the number one assistant because the other guys had all left.
Wow.
And it's like being thrown to the wolves a little bit, but you got to learn quick.
Yeah.
And he was so good to me, and throughout all the years, he's just always been a good teacher.
Yeah.
And there's so many moments they stand out. I can remember one. We were playing at Cal. I was my first year. I was a graduate assistant, so I was probably 23 years old, maybe 24. And we were riding a bus to the shoot-around the day of the game, and so I walked up and sat in the front seat on the bus there next to him, just he and I. It's like 11 o'clock in the morning. We're riding over there, and I said, Coach, what's the biggest difference between being a head coach and being an assistant coach? And he looked right at me, and he said, lonely.
Oh, my God.
And it was kind of that first time like, whoa, okay, hold on a minute now. I think this through a little bit.
Yeah.
And it was impactful, but it was true.
Yeah.
When you become a head coach, it's a much different position than being an assistant. When you're an assistant, you have other assistants to talk to. And you can go home after the game, we should have did this and did that and, this and that, and that's part of just venting as an assistant. But when you're the head coach, you're kind of sitting there by yourself a little bit. And so I learned that early on, but he was really good to me throughout the years. My college coach, Wimp Sanderson, I played for, was always a resource for me, just been great. But my uncle, Mike Gottfried, and my dad, Joe Gottfried, those two guys had more of an impact on me than anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say when Jim Harrick came in the studio here, you got to have him on your show. And just to be around you guys and just to see the love and the admiration there obviously is, but really the respect I feel like that you have for him and that he has for you, and just probably the years and the miles on the road and the games that you guys shared together.
Well, we did a lot together. When you talk about, coaching in college, you're talking about a lot of hours on the road recruiting, a lot of flights together, a lot of games, your ups and downs, your wins, your losses, all those kind of things. The guys we tried to recruit and did recruit, you spend a lot of time, and you get to know each other's family really well. He knew my family, my children. I've obviously known his family, his children, his late wife who passed away. And so you become close because you spend so much time together, and there's a lot of respect, back and forth. And you're learning from each other, all the time. And so, and then obviously when you win a national championship, that kind of, it galvanizes everything. It brings everything closer together. We had great players and great teams at UCLA, but that one team that won it, there's a bond there that's different than the others. It doesn't mean those other guys weren't important. They're very important to you. But when you win a national championship, there's something that's kind of created there that you just can't manufacture all the time. And so we shared that together. And that was just a wonderful part of our lives.
So you go from UCLA to your first head coaching job at Murray State. And then you just kind of started to build from there. And the success really came for you, I would say, at Alabama. And was that right after Murray State? And so the Elite Eight run that you took them on, what was that journey? Did you feel like that was like being in, once you're there at the Elite Eight with Alabama, are you thinking back on like, wow, it has taken all of my stops along the way to get here? Or was it just a whole world at Alabama that really you just took it up a notch, and maybe even the people that you were coaching with there?
Yeah, it was such a great run that particular year. And what happened was, I'd left UCLA, we won the national championship, and I tell people this all the time, you work so hard to get there. We win it up in Seattle in 1st of April of 1995. Our team is on the David Letterman show. Then we're heading to Disneyland for the parade. Then we're going to throw out the first pitch at Dodger Stadium, the whole team. And in the midst of that, I'm being offered this job at Murray State, and I'm thinking, well, wait a minute here. I'm enjoying all this stuff that we're doing.
Yeah.
But it was a great opportunity for me to go, and I had 3 wonderful, amazing years. Probably the most fun I've ever had coaching was at Murray State. It was a smaller school that they loved basketball. The fans got behind their teams. I tell people all the time, if they've ever seen that scene in the movie Hoosiers where, there's cars heading down the highway at night and you can see the headlights and they're just heading through the cornfields. That's kind of what it was at Murray State. Our fans traveled, and we just had a ball.
Yeah.
And then, which was interesting, after my second year at Murray State, I got offered both the Georgia and the Tennessee job. Oh. And I turned them both down, and I was waiting for the Alabama job.
Wow,
and
a man in high demand.
It happened the following year, and I was very lucky. And so I went to Alabama, which was my alma mater, and, got that thing going pretty well. Wow. And then, the year came where our team made a great run through the NCAA tournament. And we were one of the last teams to get in. That's why I always tell people, you just never know. Once you're in that tournament, anything can happen. And we were one of the last teams picked. Wow. They stuck us in the 8-9 seeded game, which if you win, whoever wins that game, you have to play number 1 seed. So that's it's like the booby prize. Okay, you're in, but if you win, you got to play a 1 seed, which that year was Stanford, and they were 30-1. Oh. They were the 1 seed of the ones. Number 1 team in the country, and we were able to beat them in the second round. And then we had to play Syracuse, who was the defending national champions from the year before, and we beat them. And now we're playing UConn, and they were just dominant that year. They blew everybody out, and they beat the drawers off of us. But you're sitting there before the game, and all I'm thinking about is we're 40 minutes away, guys. We're 40 minutes from taking Alabama, which is predominantly and will always be a phenomenal football school. Yeah. But we're 40 minutes away from taking Alabama to the Final Four. And we didn't make it, and that was just one of those tough things for me. But we were right there knocking on the door. Yeah. No Alabama team has ever made the Elite Eight other than that team, only once. Wow. And so that's kind of fun. And I hope they do at some point. But it just ended up being a wonderful time period. And I was young. I got the Alabama job in the SEC. I was 32 years old, and I was turning 33. And the league was so good. And here I am with this young guy, and I'm looking at all these icons in coaching, and you're trying to compete. Yeah. And so it was just a great period for in my growth as a coach. Yeah.
Okay, well, that gave me chills. I got to rewind back to the Stanford game because this will probably come out pretty close to March Madness. But what do you say to your team when you're in the locker room and you're about to go play the number 1 of the ones, best team in the country, and you're ready to just dominate in any way that you can, but then there is that truth looming of they are the best in the country. Do you acknowledge that, or are you just hyping your boys up of like, let's just go take names? You're
not really acknowledged. I mean, our players know. They knew who we were playing, and Stanford was obviously very good. They were 30-1. Their only loss was at Washington late in the season, so they had rolled through it pretty well. And Mike Montgomery was the coach. Matter of fact, he left after that game and took the Warriors job. That was his last college game at Stanford. But our players. They were just hungry. I always talk to our teams about being at your best at the end of the year. A lot of guys come out of the gates and they're 10-0 and they're all this and that, but people only remember how you finish in anything. I mean, they remember how you finish. Nobody remembers how you start. And so for us, it was always about building towards the end. And I always referred to the tournament as the greatest show on earth, which I believe it is. I'm a big football fan. I love the college football playoff, but I love the Super Bowl. But I tell people all the time, nothing compares to the NCAA basketball tournament.
Amen.
Everybody in America is filling out a bracket. Everybody. Every human being that I've ever known is somehow filled out a bracket, and they don't know anything about it, but they're filling out, okay, I think this team will beat that team. And so when you're in it, you cherish it. Hey, we were here, and boy, do we have a golden opportunity right now. Yeah. And in that game, it was interesting. We was pretty close at the half. We started the second half and missed our first 15 shots. We were 0 for 15 to start the second half.
Oh, my gosh.
And we finally made a shot, and we were kind of back and forth hanging in there. And they had a great player named Josh Childress, right here from Southern California, and he picked up his 4th foul. And Mike Montgomery was down there barking at the referees and didn't take him out of the game. It was about 4 minutes to go in the game. And so the very next possession, we had a really good player named Kennedy Winston, and he got the ball on the wing right in front of our bench. And we were all like, take him no matter what, because the kid had 4 fouls.
Yeah.
And Kennedy kind of looked at the bench, and he had the green light, and he just drove it in there as hard as he could, picked up the foul, and Childress was out of the game, and now our guys are like, oh boy, now we got this now, and we were able to beat them. So it was a lot of fun, and then we were staring at Syracuse the very next game.
Oh, amazing! So you handle that success and handle it well, and then you go on to NC State, and some miscues came up with the NCAA. So I guess you could call that maybe, defeat in a sense, but certainly just a low moment. What do you have to say about that? Even, comparing how you handle yourself with success and how you can handle yourself when it's not going your way. What was that time like for you?
It's a great question. So I think for me, what's important is, I played in, I started at UCLA. We win the national championship 7 years later. I have this great run at Murray State, and I'm kind of in that place where not a lot of bad has happened. I'm kind of rolling, and so I think sometimes you get content in that, and I think probably there was a lot of things for me that affected that. I look back on it now as a great learning opportunity for me. I'd gone through a divorce at the time, which was the hardest thing I've ever been through in my life. Nothing will ever compare to that. And then, I've had a couple of situations where I look back and say, I didn't handle things the way I wish I would have. And I sacrificed my integrity at times. And as a head coach especially, you're held to a higher standard than everybody else. And I think when you drop the ball in that regard, the first thing I think you have to do, or I wanted to do, was always be honest and accountable to myself. Yeah. I think the easiest thing to do in life is to blame other people. Yeah. Well, this guy, he did this, and then if it wasn't for that, then this wouldn't happen. And I think regardless of the magnitude of your mistakes, they're still mistakes. Yeah. They still are. Yeah. And I went through a number of those, and they made me better. To this day, I think as people, we're still trying to evolve. We're trying to be the best versions of ourselves all the time. Oh, yeah. Always growing. And I think sometimes when you have these things pop up, and I was told by John Wooden one time, it's probably the greatest quote, one of the greatest quotes I ever heard anybody say. I remember sitting in his living room, and Coach Wooden said to me, he said, "Mark, don't ever forget that the softest pillow in the world is a clear conscience." Wow. And I remember that day, hearing him say it, but I really didn't understand it. Yeah. And then when we put our integrity on the line and we make a mistake, or we don't show the level of integrity that we should have. Yeah. That quote, it comes back, it's like blaring in my ear when I'd lay my head on my pillow and I would say, boy, I can't even sleep. Yeah. The softest pillow in the world is a clear conscience. And so the mistakes that I have made throughout my life, I own them. I'm accountable. I'm not one that blames other people. And so you got to look in the mirror. And I think all of us have to do that all the time. Yeah. And then we always try to justify things. Well, it really wasn't that big of a deal, And the reality is it's still, it's still a miss with our integrity. It doesn't matter how big or how small it is. And so I think for all of us, I've been able to learn great lessons from that. Doesn't mean I'm perfect. I'm far from it. But I have stood on the top, and then I have been on the bottom. Yeah. I have been at both, and I know the difference. Yeah. When you were walking through that with the NCAA, who was just a good source of counsel for you during that? You know, it's interesting. It's for me, I've got a couple guys in my life. One is a pastor. And it's interesting when times get the hardest, it's like I have found for me, you know, I still go back to my roots, which is my Christian faith, which has, you know, some people would look at me and go, oh, I don't know about that, but him. But that's never changed. Now, sometimes I haven't lived my life in that way, but when I have been in those points of my life where I have felt alone or devastated or struggling, it's those guys I go back to. Those guys that have been there for 30 or 40 years in my life. You know, obviously my dad. You know, my dad was a coach. My dad's been one of those guys for me that if I have ever put my foot right in a bear trap and I call my dad and say, Dad, I think I screwed up bad. I think a lot of dads and a lot of people sometimes their first reaction would be to come down on you like, I can't believe you'd do that. That was never my dad's response. My dad's response is, okay, let's deal with this. And how are we going to deal with this? And let's sort this thing out. It's going to be okay. And I think then as a parent of 5 children, that's how I want to be with my kids. Because they're going to make mistakes just like I have, just like all of us. So that first response is one of those which is, as when you really screw up in life and you have somebody to go to that doesn't judge you, that just says, okay, I got it. We're okay. You're going to be all right, Mark. Let's sort this out and let's figure out what steps we're going to take. And I think for me, though, that's been a real key for me.
Well, I have a question I want to ask you that you ask all of your guests, which I'm sure all these lessons that you're talking about certainly informs your answer. But you ask your guests if you could breathe any certain characteristic or characteristics into your children, what would they be?
It's a great, thankful you asked. I'm glad you asked me that question.
I've been thinking about my own answer too. So
I'm glad you asked me that. So having 5 children, my kids right now are the ages of 26 to 32, and I'm going to go back and say this: when at the time when the youngest of our 5 was born, and we brought him home from the hospital, we had a newborn, a 1, a 2, and a 5, and a 6. So we had 5 kids 6 years and under at one time.
Oh my God. I come from 5, but my parents were not that crazy. I think they did in 10.
It was one right after another, and we got a co-ed basketball team. But if I could gift my children anything, I've always wanted to gift them confidence. And you know, obviously, I want them to be people that have a strong faith. They all grew up in church, going to church. And, you know, understanding how important that is, because that to me is a foundation for everything. I think from there you get kindness, and there's so many things. But on top of all those, I always say I want my kids to be confident. There's nothing more troubling sometimes for me is to look at a young person who's just so afraid. And some of that is innate. Some of that they're born that way. But I've always wanted my children to never be afraid. Take chances, take a step, do things, go for it. You know, my daughter is an international model. She travels all over the world. My oldest son played football at Stanford. I had another one play Division I sports. 2 other ones are in music. And whatever your dream might be confident. Go for it. Don't be afraid. And as you get older, which, you know, I'm a little bit older now, obviously, and you look back, a life lived in fear of trying things to me is it just breaks my heart for people. I want people to go for it. And I wanted my kids to do that as well.
I have another job in my life. I get to coach high school girls rowing. And I would say like that is definitely my biggest desire for them is just go for it. Because, and I don't know, I mean, we could probably list a few things, but it just seems like in the culture that we live in today, especially for middle school, high school age, you know, even through college where you're still, you know, getting just, you know, all washed over with so many different schools of thought. There is such a tendency for kids to just be walking around in fear and in doubt and in, who am I? What do I stand for? What do I say? And I just feel like I want to check myself most days of like, am I in any effective way instilling confidence into these girls, instilling, a true deep sense of self-worth into them? Because I think with all that they're up against today, it can eat them alive at times.
Well, and I think today, I tell people this all the time. I'm engaged right now, and my fiance has a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 17-year-old, and so I see it different than I did when my children were younger in ages. And my kids didn't have cell phones. My oldest, who's 32, he got a flip phone at 13, and they never had smartphones. Now there's some advantages. There's so much information at your fingertips. You can ask Siri what's the tallest building in the world. You don't have to go to find an encyclopedia. Some of that stuff is wonderful.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I see young people, and I saw it with my players coaching here in the last 10 or 12, last decade or so. The game ends, and it was a rush to their locker to grab that phone, and they're scrolling to see comments about how they played from Bill in Fresno or whoever. I don't know. It's like, why do you care about that?
Yeah.
And but what it does is it there's so much comparisons to others.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
And young people right now are having to navigate things that my children didn't, or I certainly did when I was young.
Yeah.
And sometimes you kind of just worry for young people in that. And I think parenting right now, you have to be so disciplined.
Yeah.
As far as how much time you get on that phone and iPads and iPhones and iPods and this and that and technology and blah, 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 because self-worth, confidence, comparisons can lead to depression and loneliness, and it just breaks my heart. And so I think even as a parent, boy, you got to be so intentional right now. There's so much thrown at children and what they see and what they hear. And really, they're not mature enough yet to do all that. They're not really mature enough to handle that. So you just want kids to have that confidence, be strong and strong-minded. And it's going to pay off for them later in life. It will.
Yeah. No, it is my biggest hope and dream to be a mother someday, but I know it'll surely be just the biggest challenge in life, and probably one of the greatest joys.
And when you have children, there's even going to be more technology. There's going to be more. It's rapidly changing, and now with AI and all that, so it's just something that you have to pay attention to it every day as a parent, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, final question. It's a fun one. Who is your all-time starting five?
This is going to be a lot of fun because in the sport of basketball, me and my buddies, we break this one down left and right. So there's a lot of talk. I hear people say, is it Jordan or LeBron? And
just settle it.
I don't go for that one at all. So here's where I start. I'm going to walk you right through it over here. And so number one, if I had to start a basketball team, and I've been around it for a long, long time, there's no way that my point guard is not going to be Magic Johnson. Okay, he's 6'10".
I love that.
He changed the game. I don't care what anybody says. That's my point guard. Period. End all. Let's go to the next question.
Okay.
The off guard to me, the next guy is Michael Jordan. The best ever. Period. End of story. Done. Put it away. I don't think anybody compares to him. When you talk about his competitive drive, all the things. Then, for me, the next one is Kobe. See, I watched Kobe. I watched him play in high school, by the way. And I watched LeBron in high school. I played against Jordan in high school, by the way. So I've been around and watched these guys. But Kobe Bryant had that killer that, these other couple guys have, but not a whole lot of people have it.
Yeah.
So I got Magic, Jordan, Kobe. My next one is you cannot have a starting five ever, in my view, without Larry Bird. Oh. And I tell people all the time.
All right, put the Indiana boy in there.
I don't care who you line up. I tell my sons all the time because we love this one. I say, go watch film. Just go watch. shooting, passing, toughness. I mean, you talk about a guy. And then as the center, I always go back between Shaq and Kareem. But I cannot leave Kareem Abdul-Jabbar off.
Okay.
Now, people forget.
Okay.
3-time college NCAA champion, 3-time college basketball player of the year. I think 6-time won the NBA championship. All-star for 18 or 19 years, leading scorer. And how about this one? He did it by perfecting a shot, the hook shot, that nobody else has ever replicated. Like, think of it in any sport, in volleyball or golf or anybody. Think of somebody becoming the best ever at scoring with a shot that nobody else can replicate. So for me, I go Magic, Jordan, Kobe, Bird, Kareem. End of discussion.
Wow. The Bird one threw me off. But, I mean, yeah, no, he would be an asset for sure.
He's on there.
Oh, wow. Well, I love it. Love getting to talk to you.
All right, Maddie.
Thanks for having me back.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great day.
Yep.